Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone here to the December 1st, 2016 meeting of the Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. I see some, I guess, new faces in the crowd tonight, so I'll take 1 second to tell you about who we are. The panel was formed in 2014 by the Vermont legislature in response to Entergy's announcement that they would be closing Vermont Yankee. And we have a number of responsibilities, and I won't bore you with all of them, but one of them is to educate the public and be a catalyst for public participation. And I think by the number of people tonight, I think we're getting successful at that. My name is Kate O'Connor, and I'm the chair of the panel, and I was appointed to the panel by Governor Peter Shumlin. And we will start the introductions. We're going to start with Jack. We're going to go right around and just introduce the panel, and then I'm going to introduce our special guests.
Good evening, I'm Jack Boyle. I'm the decommissioning director from Vermont Yankee.
Good evening, Mike McKinney, Entergy.
I'm George Desch. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Environmental Conservation, representing A&R.
Derek Jordan, citizen member.
Jim Tonkovich, citizen appointee.
Martin Langeveld, a citizen member.
David Andrews, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 300, representing the current and past employees of Vermont Yankee.
Jim Matto, citizen member.
I'm Chris Recchia. I'm Commissioner of the Public Service Department, still.
Chris Campany, Director of the Wyndham Regional Commission.
Bill Irwin, Vermont Department of Health, representing the Agency of Human Services.
I'm Steve Skibniowski. I'm a member appointed by the Vernon Board of Selectmen to represent the town of Vernon.
Mark McDonald, I represent the Vermont Senate on this panel.
I'm sorry, I can't hear that last speaker.
That was Mark McDonald. And
Mark McDonald, I represent the Vermont Senate on this panel.
And Tony, can you tell us who from the panel is on the phone?
We have David Dean joining, as well as Diane Becker. And we have two more members of the public on the line, Howard Schaefer, who is a private citizen, and Steve Maharis, who is with the Department of Energy.
And David Dean is a citizen member, and Diane Becker represents the state of New Hampshire. I'm going to do a quick overview of the agenda. We're going to have, which I think most of you are here for, is the presentation by Entergy and NorthStar on the proposed sale of VY. We're first going to have a presentation, and then we're going to have discussion, probably around 30 minutes or so of panel questions, and then we'll have 10-15 minutes from the public. After that, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go into what, if you come to our meetings, you know is sort of our normal agenda, which will be an update from Entergy. Then we're going to have a brief update on site restoration from the state of Vermont, and then Commissioner Recchia is going to download to us everything that he knows, so he has to be ready. Then we're going to talk about what we're going to do in 2017. So we can get the show on the road. I'm going to introduce Mike Toomey, who's the VP for External Affairs at Entergy, and we all know Mike because was it a year, Mike, or two, that you were actually on the panel. And then we have Scott State, who's the Chief Executive Officer of NorthStar, and we appreciate both of you being here tonight.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to talk to the public. Can everybody hear me? No. Okay. All right. Let's try this way. How's that? A little better? Okay. Scott and I are going to walk through a relatively brief presentation that describes the transaction, the objectives, and the process. It's deliberately relatively short so that we can leave time for questions. But if you have questions, I think, Kate, you want to have those held till the end, right?
Yeah, we'll do questions at the
So
end.
we'll try to run through the presentation as efficiently as possible. If this works. All right, so what we'll do here is we'll go through a brief discussion of the transaction itself, the process and timeline, our commitment to Entergy employees, and then I will turn it over to Scott to discuss the NorthStar team and the decommissioning approach they're taking, as well as a discussion briefly of site restoration standards. So, what we're doing with this transaction is we are selling Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee to a company that is an expert in demolition and decommissioning. This is their core business, and with their teaming partners, they bring a wealth of expertise and experience that, quite frankly, Entergy does not have. We, Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee, are not in the business of decommissioning nuclear facilities. We're in the business of running nuclear facilities as well as providing other utility services elsewhere within the company. So this presents an opportunity to turn this project over to somebody who is one of the most foremost experts in the business. Now, the transaction itself is contingent upon a number of things. We need to get approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They have to approve this sale and the transfer of the license to NorthStar. That approval we will seek, I think, in the first quarter of 2017. And I would, without getting into too much detail and on this slide, there are really two fundamental questions that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to ask, we believe. Number one, is NorthStar and the NorthStar team technically qualified to do the work? And number two, are they financially capable of doing the work? And only if those two answers, as well as other answers, are provided in a way that is satisfactory to the NRC, will the transaction be approved. We also need approval from the Public Service Board, which is going to make a determination of whether this transaction is in the public interest. That's a loaded term. It means different things to different people. It's a legal issue in front of the Public Service Board as to what constitutes the public interest. Our expectation is that at a minimum, the board will want to be satisfied that this project will be completed in a timely fashion in a way that is satisfactory to citizens of Vermont. One other requirement for us to close this transaction, and let me back up a little bit and make sure everybody understands, what we've signed is an agreement to sell the project to NorthStar. Only after we get these regulatory approvals and get the other conditions satisfied will we close on the transaction, and that's expected in late 2018. The next thing we have to do, other than the transaction approvals, is we've got to get all of the spent fuel that's currently in the spent fuel pool moved onto the concrete pads. They refer to as dry cask storage. I think most folks in the audience who follow this subject are generally familiar with the fact that we are in the process of moving spent nuclear fuel out of the pool and onto the dry cask canisters. That process is expected to be completed by the third quarter of 2018, and that is a necessary precondition for us closing with NorthStar. And then, as part of the Public Service Board proceeding, we've got to have the Public Service Board adopt appropriate site restoration standards, which means after you've completed the radiological decontamination of the site, you still have to make sure you've met whatever the state requirements are for what condition that site needs to be in. We've referred to that in shorthand as the site restoration standards. There were some very general standards discussed back in 2002 when Entergy bought the plant from the Vermont utilities, but they're not nearly specific enough to allow us to know how to complete this transaction. So those standards need to be adopted. And what we will be doing in the filing with the Public Service Board is NorthStar will propose certain standards that, if adopted, will facilitate the transaction, and those will be subject to review and comment and deliberation by the Public Service Board. Now, NorthStar will provide financial commitments to assure completion. The big news of this transaction is that they will start the decommissioning process in earnest by the end of 2021, and they will complete it by the end of 2030. And what complete means in this case is all the work, decontamination and dismantlement work on the site, except for the independent spent fuel storage installation, the asphyxie pad, the dry cask storage with the spent fuel. That spent fuel will remain on site until such time as the federal government picks up the spent fuel or other arrangements are made for an interim storage. We will then seek NRC approval for partial release of the site, which will include the switchyard, the Velco switchyard. That's an important part of the electrical grid in this part of Vermont, and it will remain as it is. We're not taking it down. NorthStar is not taking it down. The Velco will continue to use that to ensure delivery of electricity in southern Vermont. And we believe that their approach and the team structure and the financial assurance that they provide really is the best opportunity to get this site moving forward. So I talked a little bit about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They're the federal agency that must approve the transfer of the VY station. They'll review the decommissioning plan, the financial assurances, and the technical capabilities of NorthStar. And then, as I mentioned, the Public Service Board will review whatever factors it reviews in determining whether the sale is in the public interest, and they will set specific site restoration standards. The schedule for this transaction is that we will file a request for a certificate of public good with the state of Vermont by the end of 2016, by the end of this month. And I think it'll be closer to the middle of this month. We want to be respectful of people's family obligations, but we will be filing that application for review by the end of the year. We will then also submit a license transfer application with the NRC. The first thing that'll happen is an NRC pre-submittal public meeting, which is January 2017. I learned late this afternoon, after it was too late to change the presentation, that date is tentatively set at January 24th, 2017, and there'll be public notice of that. And then we will submit the license transfer application to the NRC in February. For our own purposes, in terms of planning the project, we are targeting regulatory approvals by the second quarter or the third quarter of 2018. Obviously, it's not up to us when the NRC makes its decisions. It's not up to us when the Public Service Board makes its decisions, but we are hopeful, based on prior track record with both of those agencies, that the matters will be concluded by the third quarter of 2018. By that time, we expect to be finished moving the spent nuclear fuel from the spent fuel pool to dry cask storage. For those of you who have been following this for some time, we originally, when we announced the closure of Vermont Yankee, said that we were planning to have the spent fuel moved by the end of 2020. We have improved on that schedule now to have it finished by the end of 2018. And assuming the regulatory approvals are concluded by the third quarter of 2018 and that the spent nuclear fuel process has been moved by the end of the third quarter of 2018, we would expect the transaction to close, meaning we actually sign the paperwork and we turn over the property and the company, really, Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee, to NorthStar, either at the very end of 2018 or perhaps on the first day of 2019. We will have employees affected by this transaction. There are employees who are currently employees of Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee. By the end of this year, we will be down, well, we're already down to about 150 employees on the site, And by the time we move only to having spent nuclear fuel on the fuel pad, we'll be down to fewer than 15 employees. And at that time, we will turn over the whole company and the employees to NorthStar. And it is our expectation that those employees, those remaining employees, 11 or 12 employees, will become employees of NorthStar, or will remain employees of Entergy Nuclear Vermont Yankee, which is then owned by NorthStar. So those employees will be taken care of, and we expect NorthStar to provide a competitive package of compensation and benefits, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Scott.
Thank you. I'm Scott State. I'm the CEO of NorthStar. To start, I'd like to just introduce a couple of our teaming partners, if they might stand up. Frederick, he's from Arriva, and he's traveled here today to meet with you, and after the meeting today, we'll certainly be happy to speak with you about Arriva and what they do. And then Glenn Nisus. Glenn is from Burns and McDonnell, and he also would be pleased to speak with you at the end of the meeting. So, NorthStar is a decommissioning company, and I don't know, does this group have a sense of what a decommissioning company does? We take things apart, and so Vermont Yankee needs to be taken apart, and we'd like to be, a partner with the local community, with the employees, and with Entergy to a certain extent in facilitating that removal. As a company, we're the largest business in the world that does this. We've been ranked #1 in the world in demolition and abatement for about the past 10 years. And we typically employ anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 people at any given time doing exactly these types of projects around the United States and in several foreign countries. So who's our team? Well, NorthStar is going to be the owner of the facility, as Mike indicated, and in that capacity, we will take the role of owning NV, which is the entity that owns the plant. We will own the license for the plant, and we will be responsible for the final decommissioning and disposition of the site and the ultimate release of the property for unrestricted use. Arriva is the largest nuclear services company in the world, and they will have a couple of primary responsibilities here. One is they will manage the spent nuclear fuel on the ISFC pad after it arrives there, prior to our ownership. And they will also segment the reactor vessel and the reactor internals. Burns McDonnell is a very large engineering and consulting firm, and they will be our engineering and licensing backbone and support the process with the NRC and with other regulatory parties for licensing activities and engineering activities. And WCS, a group that you may be familiar with, they're part of the Texas-Vermont Compact for disposal of nuclear waste. They're our partner on this project to take all of the radioactive waste from the site. And under the current consideration, that includes all the Class A, Class B, and Class C waste. A project of this type is going to generate a small amount of waste that's considered greater than Class C, and there's no place currently licensed to dispose of greater than Class C waste. But WCS does have an application in place to take that waste and may well have the right to do that by the time we start this project, in which case we would move that waste as well. As Mike mentioned, the spent nuclear fuel is going to be in the dry fuel storage system at the plant and will remain there until the Department of Energy fulfills its obligations under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and comes and removes that material. So, just in terms of our experience, we've worked with all the major utilities in the United States. We've worked with utilities overseas as well. And we've worked at, us and our teaming partners have worked at every major decommissioning project at a nuclear facility in the U.S. As a prime contractor, NorthStar has had the responsibility on a number of research reactors, which, as a number of people have pointed out, are not commercial nuclear power plants. They're research facilities. But I'd like to point out that the process and approach and decommissioning of those facilities and final site release is identical for a research facility and a power reactor. The difference is scale. And in terms of scale, we've decommissioned dozens, if not hundreds, of large fossil plants, much larger than Vermont Yankee. And that prior experience, the combination of those two things, gives us a pretty good perspective of how to execute on a large project, but also how to execute on a commercial nuclear power plant or reactor project. And the team of people that we've assembled to do this, from our company and from our suppliers, are all people very experienced in decommissioning nuclear facilities. For example, Areva has committed their top vessel segmentation expert in the world from Germany to come and support the cutting of the reactor vessel. The plan moving forward has us, upon taking ownership, taking the project in a number of phases. The first phase being removal of the reactor vessel and its internals. At that point in time, probably well over 99% of the radioactive source term of the plant will be out of the plant. In fact, when you move the fuel out of the plant, that's about 98% of the radioactive source term that's in the plant today. The vessel and the internals are also very radioactive, and moving them out leaves a very, very small residual amount of radioactive material. So the process of decommissioning a nuclear plant versus a fossil plant is one in which we have an additional waste stream. In a fossil plant, we would have PCBs and asbestos and other types of hazardous waste components that we manage and dispose of. In a nuclear plant, we have those same contaminants, but we also have radioactive metal, radioactive concrete, and other type of radiological contamination. So it's just an additional waste stream. And we feel comfortable with our ability to execute on projects like this with our partners. We're confident that we can execute on this project and do it within the economic parameters that have been set up. And we don't say that just based on a hope and a prayer. The experience that we've got with other facilities, and my personal experience for that matter, I was responsible for decommissioning a small research reactor in the UCLA campus in 1992. And on that project, we executed flawlessly, and we'll do exactly the same steps on Vermont Yankee that we did on that project. I was selected to be part of that project by the university specifically because when I was in college, I had been a reactor operator at a research reactor identical to that facility. And as such, I had experience and I knew where the hot components would be. I knew the facility and I knew where to look when we were taking the structures apart for the highest levels of contamination. And I could get a sense for the health and safety of our workers and make sure that the project was conducted effectively and efficiently. With that in mind, we'll do the same thing on this project with the existing employees. We'd like to maintain a stable level of the existing workforce to support the project going forward, people that have been there, people that know the facility, and people that can help us ensure that we do this in an economic way, but also in a safe way, and we protect not only our workers, but the surrounding public as well. So just kind of pictorially looking at how a project like this works, in the upper left-hand corner you see a picture of the University of Buffalo research reactor, a project we did in the last year or two. And if you look at it, it's a facility not unlike any other reactor facility. The reactors that are research reactors, the primary difference is they're not pressurized. They're not contained with a boiler like in a boiling water reactor or a vessel in a pressurized water reactor with steam generators. They're not made to produce power, but they do split atoms and they do create radioactive waste and they do activate concrete and they do activate metals. So we were responsible to the University of Buffalo for the complete removal of this facility and the ultimate free release of the property for unrestricted use. Moving to the right, you can see a picture of a project that Areva conducted where they segmented a reactor vessel at the Vergassen plant. It's a boiling water reactor nearly identical to Vermont Yankee. And in Germany, the requirements in a segmentation are that the pieces fit effectively in a 55-gallon drum. So this vessel had to be segmented into about 250 pieces. For disposal in the United States, using the overpacks and the disposal canisters that we've got designed, we'll probably have 1/10 that number of cuts. So the technology to do what we need to do to segment the vessel, to get it out, to get it disposed, is well within the realm of what's been done previously. In the lower left corner, you see a pictorial for Burns and McDonnell, and they've had a lot of relevant experience as well with nuclear fuel facilities and other radiologically contaminated sites where they've done the final status surveys and got sites released for unrestricted use. So they will be directly supporting that. And then in the bottom right corner, you see our final partner, WCS. That's a picture of their disposal facility. And there's a cell, the bottom cell that you see kind of in the middle of the picture is the actual cell that is the one that's been funded under the Texas-Vermont Compact. So Vermont, I don't recall when the commitment was made or when the compact was signed, but Vermont has a statutory right for disposal of its nuclear waste in that cell. And so having that disposal option available to us was critical in being able to conduct this project. So what are the benefits of what we're proposing to do here? One, this is our core business. We decommission, we deconstruct facilities for a living. And to do this project right, we didn't feel like it was something we could take on our own. There were areas of expertise that we wanted world-class, best-in-class support, and that's why we brought the teaming partners in that we did. We believe that it's really, a nuclear decommissioning dream team that we've been able to put together here. The approach that we're going to use is unique in terms of how we fund the work. So everybody knows there's a nuclear decommissioning trust fund, and we have to do the work within the amount of money available in that trust fund. So we have taken this project and broken it down into over 900 discrete project elements. We've costed each of those elements, we've added all that up, and we've confirmed that it fits within the decommissioning trust account. So the way we will do this work and assure that we don't overspend doing the work is we will never draw out of the trust account more money than has been assigned as a cost to do that piece of work. So if there's a piece of work to remove a pump and it's $100,000, and if that costs us $150,000, we draw $100,000 out of the trust account. So we have a fixed payment for each piece of the work, and as such, it avoids what's happened on some of the other decommissioning projects where the owners of a facility would simply draw as much money out of the trust account as it costs to do any given scope of work. And at the end of the day, everybody looks around and says, hey, we're out of money, but we haven't gotten rid of this plant yet. With our approach, that's not going to happen. The guaranteed fixed payment system that we have is going to include that each of these elements of work that can be bonded or otherwise guaranteed in a similar fashion will be guaranteed. So there'll be backup surety and support to commit that each of the work elements gets done and gets done at the price that's committed from the outset. The pieces that are not bonded, like disposal of the radioactive waste, that's a fixed unit contract. So we've negotiated fixed unit rates with WCS for every type of radioactive waste that's going to come out of the site. And we've priced the disposal for this project at 100% of the plant. So essentially the entire facility being crushed, rubbleized, and sent to Texas. We think there's probably a better way to do that. There's a lot of clean concrete here. We think there's some discussion that should be had about the millions of tons of material, clean material that's going to be moved, that there may be a better way to keep some of that on site, to use it for fill. But from a pricing perspective, we've taken the bounding or conservative approach here to make sure that the amount of funding we get at closing of this transaction is enough to get the job done. We're also going, to do something unique related to site restoration. You know, as it stands right now, the expectation was that site restoration and restoration done to complete and satisfy the agreement with the state would be done effectively after the radiological decommissioning. And what we're going to propose to do is to do those things in parallel. The radiological risk on the site, when you take the spent fuel out of the reactor or out of the plant and you take the vessel and the internals out of the plant is not necessarily the highest priority to go and get. So we're going to deal with any hazardous waste components or other items, asbestos, that sort of thing, that are not required for radiological license termination in parallel with the radiological work that we do. And the result of all that is a more efficient approach than would typically be seen on a project like this. And it's one of the cost factors that we have that makes the project doable by us for the available funding that would not necessarily be achievable under the Entergy ownership. So what does the timeline look like? The top timeline is the current timeline that's being conducted for the plant. That's the safe store dormancy period through 2067, followed by a decommissioning campaign and final site release in 2075. A number of assumptions in all of this related to when DOE might come and pick up their spent fuel, but you know, that's an uncontrollable variable for us. The bottom timeline is how we propose to do this, where we complete the fuel transfer, and you can see that that's being proposed to be completed in 2018 versus 2020. We have a decommissioning period. We have a final site release or partial site release no later than 2030. And when we say partial site release, that means we're releasing essentially the entire site other than the ISFC. We can't obviously release that because there's radiological material or there's nuclear fuel there. And then whenever the DOE does come and get the fuel off the site could then be fully released and put to better use. And we actually think there's opportunity at the partial site release time as well. We're looking at various opportunities for economic development related to the site, and I'll get to those in a minute. But at partial site release, there is an opportunity to get some beneficial reuse. So the overall objective is to work through all of the components associated with the decommissioning process, put together site restoration standards that make sense for the state, for the local community, for us as landowner, and look for an opportunity to redevelop the property. We're not looking to take shortcuts. We're not looking to do this project in a way that's unprofessional or otherwise not industry standard. We've looked at all of the other major decommissioning projects that have been done in the Northeast, and we think that the way we can do this would be with a consistent set of standards. And when we get done with a site, we'd like it to be worth something. We'd like it to have a future use, and we'd like to put it to that future use. And to that end, the standards that we're looking for are going to be related to the end use of the property. Our radiological dose limits, the dosing model, we see this as a resident farmer dose model, which is the typical standard used for this type of thing. There's a lot of non-radiological criteria. The IROC, the Vermont standards is what we would typically expect to use there. And there's issues related to subsurface structures, what goes, what doesn't go, how many feet below grade would you remove walls, would you remove foundations, and that sort of thing. We're not talking about leaving behind radiological materials. We're talking about what structural materials below grade it makes sense to remove from the site for the future site uses that we see that would be available for it. So that earlier site restoration, absent removal of the ISFC pad in the switch yard, is what leads us to the potential future site uses. So we've looked at this. We think the site's got some fairly obvious light industrial or industrial uses. We think potentially the highest and best use is going to be something like a solar energy facility. You've got probably 100 acres that you could use on the site. You've got a switch yard and a facility that's relatively level. And we feel like in our early look at this, we've done some design work and looked at the potential investment we would make to develop a solar site here. And you know, that's something that we've seen as a likely development option. And our objective with looking at options would be to find something that's a good final economic use, something that the public stakeholders find comfort with, and something that everyone, when we get done, could be proud to say that that's the future use of what used to be a nuclear power plant. So with that, I think, Kate, we're prepared to take some questions.
Thank you very much. We're going to take questions from the panel first. And what I would ask everyone is, you know, we have a limited amount of time, so when you ask a question, use the least amount of words that you possibly can. I also want to acknowledge that I asked the public to submit questions, and we got a lot of questions, and there were a lot of good ones. Every question was passed along to Entergy and NorthStar. This is, I think I might have said this already, this is just the first of what will be more meetings. So if a question is not answered tonight because we don't have the time, or because it just can't be answered until after the CPG is filed, or the NRC, don't worry, we're going to get to it. So I guess we'll open it up to the panel. Commissioner Recchia.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you guys for coming and making the presentation. I have some clarifying questions that I think will help both the panel and the audience understand this a little better. And in my role as a good lawyer, which I'm not at all, I will only ask questions that I know the answers to. So I think it would be helpful for you to explain a little more as to why it is safe and how you were able to move the spent fuel 2 years sooner, because one of the principles we had in place before was to keep the fuel rods, the newest fuel rods, in the pool for 5 years so they could decay sufficiently to go into dry cask. So I don't know if you want to take a shot at that first.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Recognizing my limitations as an English major and a former lawyer, I will tell you that the bottom line is we were able to work with our partner on that, Holtec, and find that there were some technological improvements on being able to move spent fuel that was of a more recent vintage into dry cask sooner. Mm-hmm. And this is not the only site in the country where that will be done, but certainly as the country itself is moving toward more sites that are being decommissioned, more companies are focusing on the technological improvements that can be brought to bear to improve the efficiency, and this is an example of one of those efficiencies. And we feel very confident that we are on the right track here. It'll end up being almost 4 years by the time we get all the fuel in, and it will be sequenced similar to the way we described. It'll just be, ultimately about a year or so, mere year and a half sooner than we thought we could. But there are important savings to the Decommissioning Trust Fund and to the work we do with the DOE by being able to do that sooner. And as we're funding that decommissioning, spent fuel management work outside of the Decommissioning Trust Fund, we were interested in finding a better way to do it.
So then, Mike, you just mentioned that that we would finish the D&D, the decommissioning, decontamination and dismantlement by 2030, but that also includes site restoration, correct?
Correct.
I think that's some important
That's really a
clarification.
question for Scott, but I know the answer.
Yeah, very good. And then, to be clear, although I think, Scott, you explained it well, and you explained your experience well. This would be the first nuclear power plant that you guys would be doing in the United States, correct?
It would be the first turnkey nuclear power plant project. We've done effectively every project element at a
Right.
nuclear power plant, but as a turnkey project or project as owner, yes.
And I think you explained pretty well why you guys feel like you can do it for roughly the $560 million that's in the decommissioning trust fund versus sometimes that's compared to the $1.24 billion estimate that was in Entergy's PSDAR. That included several things that are not relevant here. Do you guys want to explain any of that, or you just want to just note for the public that those two numbers are not equal to each other? There's different things that go into it.
So the question is, the decommissioning cost estimate that we submitted, and the difference between that number and the amount that's currently in the trust fund. And that's an item that we will discuss in excruciating detail in the proceedings before the board, but I think it's sufficient to say at a high level that the $1.24 billion included approximately $370 million of spent nuclear fuel management, right? And a big chunk of that we're financing off of the project with the line of credit, and another big chunk of that was for maintenance of the spent fuel matter. So if you really isolate that $368 million out, you get into something that's sort of 850,000, actually $850 million, $875 million. Then, again, I won't get into detail, but there are significant savings that NorthStar's approach brings that we do not. We are not in the business of decommissioning projects. We do not have the expertise. We do not have the labor force. We do not have the equipment. NorthStar and its team are in this business, and so they can do it more efficiently. If we were to hire somebody to do it, we'd have to have a whole project management organization, because we would still be accountable to the NRC and to the state. So you'd have a layer of overhead on top of that, and we'd have to find partners for each of these things. The other aspect of this that I won't get into Scott's numbers, but they're able to negotiate better pricing than we would, because we're not in this business. And all in all, the bottom line is there are savings with Scott. That number has to back out the spent fuel management, and when you do just those two adjustments, you get to a number that is close to what's in the decommissioning trust fund, and you've got another 5 years of trust fund growth that can be done between now and 2021. And the final point is, we've actually done a significant amount of work already just in the last couple of years that reduces the amount of work that's left to be done. So that's a long answer to a short question, but that's the basics of it. And again, I expect that to be something that is a matter of discussion at the Public Service Board in excruciating detail.
Yep. And the last question I have, which is really just a clarification again, is this fixed price reimbursement concept, which I think is really important for people to understand. A given work task will have a fixed price associated with it. That work will be contracted out, or you guys will be doing it, and that work task needs to be fully completed, even if it costs somebody twice as much as what the fixed price contract was for, and they won't be able to get reimbursed from the trust fund for even the fixed price unless that work is completed. Is that correct? Is that a fair way to describe that?
Generally, yes. The way this works is that each of these elements is broken down into a number of milestones. And as milestones are achieved, payments are made. But the sum of those payments is exactly the amount that's agreed to at the inception. It's never more, it's never less than that. So we know with certainty when we begin the project what the cost that's going to be payable from the NDT will be.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith.
David Andrews has a related question.
I know we can't give an exact number here, but when I first heard this, this sale announcement, that was the first thing going through my head as well, was 575 million, 1.24 billion, how does this jive together? In reading the press release, it spoke about a contractually agreed minimum level of funding at the close of the, condition to the close of the decommissioning trust, and it speaks to the 5.5% per year rate of return. Do you have an estimated amount, assuming an end of 2018 closing, as to what that actual strike price would be to help us better get a grip on that compared to the 1.24 billion?
Well, I do appreciate the question. I think that probably falls into the confidential nature of the contract between us and NorthStar. Obviously, there'll have to be a significant amount of money in the trust fund. But we've done the calculations. We're comfortable that the fund will hit that mark at the time of closing. Obviously, if it's not at the time of closing, then we've got to settle up with NorthStar on that issue. But I don't think it's appropriate to get into the details of that contract in open forum at this point.
Understand, but it is fair to say that if the fund, if I'm getting this right, if there's a less than 5.5% return, that difference will be made up by Entergy.
The difference will be made up by Entergy. That's true.
Thank you.
Steve Skibnowski, representing the town of Vernon. A couple of questions that I was asked to pass along. First off, the town of Vernon worked on a tax agreement with Entergy, I think it was a year or so ago. I'm not exactly sure of the date, but it goes out through 2022, as I understand it. What is your current position on that, and should we be expecting renegotiation or some changes there, or are we going to be living with that agreement? And if I might, I'll just list these off because I'm not expecting an answer to all these tonight, but the second question I had had to do with environmental monitoring during the deconstruction. This process is coming up quicker than some of us envisioned under the Safe Store plan, and we're wondering if NorthStar, I know NorthStar as far as Arriva has extensive experience with environmental monitoring. Just wanted to touch base on that issue for Vernon. Two other items, traffic. What do you expect in terms of amount of traffic over the next 10 to 15 years on Route 142 that we might be expecting in Vernon as far as highway usage? And then, of course, our last question has to do with the second use of the property, and you did touch on that, but we are particularly interested in the historical aspects, including Governor Hunt House, and where that might fit into the big picture. So those are the questions I had, and if you can't answer some of them, that's fine, but I did want to get them out on the table at this point.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just going to take the first question, and I'll let you handle the next three. I don't see any change in the tax agreement. We reached it, and we'll pay it for the next whatever number of years we have left, 6 years left in that tax agreement. You know, if the parties, after we transfer to NorthStar, want to sit down and talk about another agreement, then that would be between Scott and the town. But at this point, we would expect that we would simply fulfill our obligations under that tax agreement as long as we're the owner of the property.
Yeah, and to Mike's point, the tax agreement, we've seen that document, we understand it, and we have every intent to fulfill our obligations there. We're acquiring Envy, and I believe your tax agreement on the property is with Envy. So we're acquiring the company that already has that agreement. We would be in default or in breach of that agreement if we didn't honor it, and I can tell you that it's our intention to do so. As far as environmental monitoring, yeah, projects like this have extensive monitoring at the work surface, you know, adjacent to the site, in neighborhoods. You know, we're not anticipating a project here where we are going to contaminate, you know, properties around the site. This kind of work is done in such a way that non-fixed contamination is fixed. We work in negative air when we can to make sure that materials aren't leaving the site, and we do monitor actively all around the perimeter of the property, and we also monitor, obviously, for all the workers with correct dosimetry and ensure worker safety as well. The traffic over a 10 to 15 year period, interesting question. That's one of the reasons we think there's a discussion that should be had about what material really needs to leave the site, and if it's clean concrete, is it important? If it's important to everybody that material leaves the site, that's not something that we would say can't happen, but we think that there's a significant amount of traffic if we've got to move material by truck. Obviously, that's a fairly congested spot, and there's only one way in and one way, or two ways in and two ways out, I guess, depending if you go north or south. And but you can expect a traffic impact. You can't avoid it. You're moving a lot of material. Now, we are going to move as much as we can by rail. One of our first activities is to work on the rail spur to the site, which I don't know when it became inactive, but it was used to build the site. And so we fully intend to invest a significant amount of money to upgrade the rail spur for shipments to WCS of radioactive materials. What was the last question? Future uses. So, obviously the town of Vernon is an important stakeholder in the future use of the site. We're really at the conceptual stage. If we're talking about 2030, we're talking about 14 years from now. And, and that's at partial site release. So we'd like to begin a process, maybe through this panel or otherwise, to look at future site uses and to begin to develop some strategies and some plans as to what we might do with the property, given what we ultimately establish with the state as site release standards.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And again, as Chris said, appreciate your coming to describe the situation and to answer questions. I have 5 I'm going to ask, and hopefully they'll be fairly straightforward. The first is about the Holtec casks for the fresher fuel. Are those licensed at this time?
The answer is yes, right?
We can't hear you.
Okay, Scott can answer that.
Yeah. So the Holtec canister, the license amendment or change of condition has been submitted for approval, and fuel would not be moved until that approval is granted by the NRC. And this kind of goes to Chris's question as well. One of the considerations and reasons time 3 years versus 5 years works is spent fuel has a lot of decay heat when you remove it from the reactor. There's a lot of short-lived isotopes that are decaying that are creating a lot of heat. At 3 years, you get to a very steep inflection in the curve, and the amount of decay heat after 3 years kind of levels out and doesn't diminish that much between 3 and 5 years. So it's not even really a technological breakthrough. It's just a fact that you can cool a metal fuel rod with convection at 3 years efficiently enough that it's not a problem to put it in a canister at that point in time.
Great, thanks. Second one, the issues surrounding the acquisition of WCS by Energy Solutions. Is that perceived to be a concern in this partnership that you have for NorthStar, or do you think that things will proceed either way?
It's an absolute non-issue for the following reason. We knew about the proposed acquisition, and when we engaged with WCS, we structured our agreement with them specifically around the fact that if they're acquired by Energy Solutions, our agreements with them would hold as is. Another consideration is we have a statutory right in Vermont to send nuclear waste to WCS. So, and there's a prearranged pricing model for that. So it won't have any impact on what our business plans are in Vermont. If we're to pursue this kind of activity in other places, we'll be very mindful of the fact that if they were owned by Energy Solutions, you would effectively have one source of disposal.
And we're very glad to hear about the accelerated schedule to decontamination and dismantlement. Do you have a sense of when site characterization might take place? There's a lot of history in nuclear power plant decommissioning of unexpected finds, where a pool of liquid had accumulated up against a concrete foundation for a very long period of time, and costs were exceeded because of that. Do you know when you might start site characterization, and to what degree do you expect that to be?
So, and I think part of this question is for Entergy, because there's discussions about further site characterization that would take place before our ownership.
That's right. We've already done some site characterization. NorthStar's certainly done some due diligence at the site in negotiating with us around this arrangement. I do think there are some further discussions that need to be had about what are the next steps and by when will they be taken, either prior to the closure of the transaction or afterwards. I expect this will get wrapped up into the Public Service Board approval process, and that we will reach some kind of a consensus among the parties as to what's the right way to approach that issue.
Great, and that leads to my last question, which is, during the efforts to come to a settlement agreement independently, there was a lot of discussion about relationships, protocol, the way things would work between Entergy and state agencies. And I'm curious if Mr. Slate can elaborate on NorthStar's perception of partnering with, for example, the Department of Health that has environmental monitoring for radiologicals, and the Agency of Natural Resources for the monitoring of non-radiologicals during the active phases of decontamination and dismantling.
Our approach to working with state agencies, and this is true in all 50 states and other foreign countries as well, is full and open compliance and transparency in terms of what we do. We don't see this project being any different than any other project of its kind. Just like environmental monitoring, we'll be taking samples, we'll be making sure that we're not spreading contamination, and that information will be shared promptly with regulators, good or bad. We don't have a reputation of hiding anything. If you look at the projects that we've got, I think we've got some project handouts here for the other nuclear facilities we've done. You'll find that we have no safety violations, no OSHA violations, no violations of any kind on any of those projects. And we take great pride in our company's ability to conduct work in an honest and ethical way.
Just keep going right down, Chris. Okay, we'll get to you next, Senator.
Thanks again for being here. Two questions. One, so it sounds like you already have some site restoration assumptions that you've made. Are there any beyond what you said about kind of generally how others, the standards which other sites were restored? Are there any other specifics that you can share at this time, or?
We're going to include those specifics in the testimony that's going to be filed later this month, and we're still fine-tuning the proposals.
And are you guys hoping for one docket, both a sales docket and a site restoration docket?
I think they should all be resolved in one docket. I think they can all be resolved in one docket, and that's certainly our preference.
Mine, ours too. For folk who don't know, it takes a lot of time and effort. And then the other thing, I would just, I guess, extend an invitation. I mean, I know you guys will be working with the town of Vernon, you'll be working with IndyCap. The Wyndham Regional Commission, we have responsibilities like coordinating transportation within the region, and so we're a liaison with Vietran. So as you're having the rail conversations, other conversations that have like a beyond the town impact and more of a regional or even interstate, just if you could, we're happy to help facilitate some of those conversations and help you along with those. And also, I'm assuming there may be some, I don't know exactly what your workforce looks like. I know I've seen the Entergy assumptions about how many people they would have had at any given time going through the D&D process. So it might be helpful when you know, when you have those assumptions, to kind of share what you think your housing situation is going to be for the workers that are coming in, what the tenure is likely to be, just what that looks like, so we know what the impact is going to be on permanent housing, temporary housing, hotels, that kind of thing. Because I know this will be probably different, I would guess, than a refueling outage or something like that.
It's very different than a refueling outage because the duration of a refueling outage is, as short as you can make it. We look at the duration of this project, and there's some level of it that's permanent. I can tell you there's certain expertise that we need at various points in time in a project like this that are travelers. And much like an outage person, the people that are the best operators for certain kinds of equipment that we're going to use here are not going to be here for more than 60 days maybe at a time, and they may come and go as different aspects of the project open up. But we run the overall program of decommissioning as one program with literally hundreds of small projects within it that we execute the most efficient way we can.
Hey, Tony, could you hand your microphone to Senator McDonald? I think he wants to say something. Thank you.
This is a big unload to many people here this evening. I'm not a lawyer, but a few times the witnesses have referred to their partners, and I urge the chair to make us use vocabulary that people understand and has meaning. You talked about your partners, Holtec. Are they your partners? Or are they, do you contract with them, or are they a supplier and you're buyers?
I think you could describe them in any one of those ways, but they're a vendor of ours. They provide services to us in the management of spent fuel.
Okay, so you're not partners with them, and you cannot incur debts on their behalf, and they can't incur debts on your behalf.
If you want to use the legal terminology for each of these terms, then no, they're not a legal partner.
Okay, and then also the Texas Compact was referred to as being partners in something. They're a low-level nuclear waste depository. Several people on this, some people on the previous panel urged Vermont not to enter into a contractual agreement with Texas when Texas was given a majority vote in the governing of that compact. So we are minority stakeholders in that, which doesn't make the state of Vermont partners, and certainly doesn't make the proposed arrangement partners with the Texas Compact, because that's not the proper legal term. Those are picky questions, but this is an evening when we're getting a lot of information, and it's important that we use terms that have legal meaning when we're trying to assess what's going on. Madam Chair, we're one of the gentlemen on the end, and I apologize, I can't read your name from here. Can't read it from here.
State.
Okay. Talked about the arrangement for decommissioning in which a certain value would be placed on removing a part. And if it turned out that that was incorrect or inaccurate, that the decommissioning fund would only be liable for that amount of money. Does the buyer from Vermont Yankee in this case, is it pledging or have a bond, or is there money set aside to cover the such cases where something costs more than had been expected? Is that part of the purchase agreement that is being presented to us? Or if something turns out to cost more, is the solution to say, well, we can't afford it and decommissioning is put off to a later date? And that's a kind of a general broad framework question.
So The simple answer is yes, there are performance guarantees and backing performance, financial performance assurances, bonding, and other similar types of assurances. And the second answer is no. We have no anticipation of making a determination that some element of this project is over budget and we're going to delay continued performance or completion of the work. There's specific requirements in our agreement with Entergy associated with the 2030 date. There's significant financial penalties if we don't achieve those requirements. And we have no intention of looking for opportunities to delay this in any way.
Madam Chair, the entity that owns this plant now has a limited liability corporation, and they've let us know that they're not going to spend any money that they don't have to spend. They have so many assets, and it'll take them 60 years to get to the point where they can decommission this place without using the money that they have as assets. And they wish to sell it to someone else who, if you're suggesting, is going to take the risk that they can decommission it more sooner for less money. And that group has to get approval from the NRC. Okay. So the reason we're in the dilemma we're in now is that the NRC didn't require money be set aside for decommissioning. And the NRC prohibited the state from requiring that money was set aside for decommissioning. The NRC approves things often that turn out to be to not work. So the condition of this sale goes to the NRC, who's going to be asked to determine whether or not it's financially holds water. And their track record is that the NRC tends repeatedly to permit companies that do things that turn out not to come to fruition. What role does the state have in this transaction to protect Vermonters from, once again, the NRC approving a proposal, only to find out that it wasn't prudent and didn't have the money guaranteed in it? And how is this going to be any different than what's already happened?
I think we're going to have
That's a big question. I don't expect to have it answered today.
No,
I think we're going to have Commissioner Recchia try to answer that one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Kate. I think this is a really important question, and as the presentation described, this needs to also be approved independently by the Public Service Board. The department representing the public interest before that board will be asking, is this in the public interest? And clearly, at the very least, and there are many levels of what goes into the public interest, as Mike Toomey had alluded to, but clearly the financial and technical capability of this new company to do this work on the time frame they say is a key component of that being in the public interest. So the financial wherewithal of NorthStar, its partners, its parental owners are all going to be discussed in great detail before the Public Service Board. And we will make sure that the company is able to do the work that they say they can do and has the backing to complete it once started. The other thing I would say is that just in terms of the guarantees and performance bonding, I think that that's a piece of the discussion as well. So, I agree with the senator about NRC's, efforts in the past as I've watched them do their work. We will cover those same issues, not the radiological piece of it, but, but clearly the public interest depends on the radiological piece being done well. And we will also, what we've been doing the last few years, which we hadn't done before, is participating more actively in the NRC process itself. So the state will be in two places, hopefully not at the same time. So.
We're going to have panel discussion for about another 10 minutes, and then we're going to go to the public. We have David Dean on the phone who wants to ask a question. Tony, is he there?
Am I being heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I am curious, and at a very high level, if NorthStar could explain to me why they are interested in purchasing a plant that is not producing revenue, that has a fair amount of liabilities, and how is it they see this operation meeting their goal to be a successful business? And I guess you could translate that to, where's the profit? I don't see it.
Okay, this is Scott State. I'm happy to take that. So, number one, we're not buying a plant. We're buying a company that owns a plant. And the company that owns the plant, which is effectively at this point a liability because it needs to be decommissioned and removed, also owns an asset, which is the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund. And the structure of the way we've put our costing together, we're recovering our cost to do the work. And we've got a contingency factor that's an industry standard, normal contingency factor on each work element that we do. And the way we make a profit on this project is we do the work within our estimated cost, and the contingency factor that we carry becomes our profit. So if we have to use all of our contingency, we don't make any money on this job. But if we do the job within the expected cost, and the contingency isn't needed, that becomes the profit that we generate doing business this way. So that's the very simple explanation of the economic model. And I can tell you that the project wasn't put together in a way where we said, okay, here's how much the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust account has. We have to do it within that amount of money. When we estimated the work, we didn't even look at the trust account. We estimated the work and determined what it would cost, including contingency, for us to do this job. And then we measured that against the trust account, and that's the basis on which the 5.5% was discussed earlier. That's how it was determined what that trust account had to have in order for us to be able to execute on this project.
Follow-up question, Madam Chair.
Sure.
How many projects do you have underway now under this same type of arrangement?
I'm not sure. Under a fixed reimbursement type arrangement like this?
Yes, your number of tasks and a fixed price for those tasks, et cetera.
A few hundred.
Does that answer your question?
That's a lot. And they're not all in the USA, right? I mean, are there 100 plants being decommissioned?
You asked.
In USA?
Okay, you asked about projects. I wasn't talking specifically about nuclear power plants.
I'm sorry. Being inarticulate. My apology.
Are we all set?
Similar projects to this one. How many are underway with your company, and sort of where are they in the timeline to completion?
Are you asking if there are any other projects of them purchasing a company that owns a nuclear power plant and then they're going to decommission it? Is that your specific question?
Yes, that is the specific question. What I'm trying to get at is what's the downside risk in terms of having a number of projects, all of which cost more money for each of the elements of decommissioning and et cetera. I'm just looking for the risk here.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. O'Connor, for that clarification. Yeah, this is the only project specifically of this type on a nuclear power plant that we've structured. This is effectively a business model that we've used doing work on other types of projects, fossil plants, refineries, smelters, other facilities we've decommissioned. But it's, those are not facilities where an owner was in a position where they owned that asset within a company and we acquired the company and did it within a trust account. The concept of a decommissioning trust fund is, in my opinion, pretty unique to the nuclear power industry. I can't think of any other place I've seen something exactly like that. And in terms of nuclear power plants, this will be the first nuclear power plant in the country that's done specifically this way. It's not the first nuclear power plant that's being decommissioned with a contractor that's come into an ownership position, but it's the first time a contractor has put forth a model where we're using a fixed payment methodology that guarantees that we won't overdraw the nuclear decommissioning trust to do the work.
Thank you.
Jim, did you have a question?
Thank you. This relates, Mike, to your earlier discussion of the difference in cost between the original proposal and this proposal. And my question is this: given you mentioned that there are different approaches, and this approach has resulted in a lower estimate of the ultimate cost of doing it, and that's a big saving. And importantly, that the fund will grow in those 5 to 6 years. So my question is, does this proposal change, hopefully reduce Entergy's planned draw on that decommissioning trust fund during those 5 to 6 years so that it would grow more? In other words, if Entergy continues to draw at the rate they're drawing, that growth probably would not be much in those 5 years.
Well,
Realize that no one can predict the market. I would be asking you different questions if you could. But.
Right, and Jim, I appreciate the question. I don't have all the details, but it's a good question that allows me to clarify a couple things. If we stay on track here, we'll transfer the plant, the company that owns the plant, and the decommissioning trust fund to NorthStar at the end of 2018. So we'll only be responsible for the draws out of the trust fund for the next 2 years. Okay. Because after that, we'll turn it over to NorthStar. A big chunk of the work that's going to be done over the next 2 years is the spent fuel management project, moving the spent fuel into the dry cask storage. That's being funded by a line of credit that we established over a year ago to do that. There will be some continued draws. We have a work plan that we have in place of what has to be done between now and when we turn the keys over to NorthStar. Some of that work might be affected, but I would guess that most of it will not be affected by this impending transaction. This is work that needs to be done to get the project ready to be turned over to NorthStar, and that work will come out of the decommissioning trust fund. The only piece I don't have tonight is what that level is. But it's all progress being made, and obviously, we've said this before, as we do work on the site, obviously the trust fund value goes down, but the remaining work goes down also. So that progress is being made.
Well, right, but I think an important distinction is that your earlier statement was that NorthStar can do it for less money.
One important element of what Mike's talking about, and this has been referred to already, there's a mandatory minimum amount of funding that has to be in the NDT when we take possession of the company. So if Entergy spends more money than they expected to spend they're just going to have to put that amount of money back in, or the trust fund is going to have to grow at a rate significant enough that they get to that minimum level of funding. But the project requires, the transaction requires that we get a certain specified minimum dollar value in that NDT at closing.
Okay, we did very quickly, if I could, this will be the last one. Looking at that, I'm thinking in terms of worst-case scenario. If Entergy were to, I understand you're saying that the plan is gonna proceed pretty much, not significantly changed over the next 2 years. If you have a guaranteed amount in the fund at turnover, and if Entergy draws more than that from the fund, you said that they would either put it back or the fund would grow. And I think that, in hindsight, I think relying on fund growth instead of Entergy's funding, in my view at least, it has been a mistake. And so when you say that, it makes good sense to me, but it's not fully reassuring that there won't be a delay. If Entergy were to draw too much, more than anticipated, shouldn't say it that way, and the fund not grow, would that not leave you in the position of saying, well, we have to delay because that was the plan and it's not, and the money's not there?
No, because the transaction structure, the documents that I think were referred to previously have a calculation that says the trust fund would need to grow at 5.5% per year for it to grow to the level that is required to be in the fund at closing on the sale. So if, for example, the fund has to be 500 million, just pick a round number, not the correct number, and the fund has 490 million because it grew at 3% over the next 2 years. At closing, before we would close and take ownership, Entergy would have an obligation to top off the fund to the minimum amount that's in our contract to purchase. So, nobody's relying on the fund growing. If the fund grows at that rate, that simply says Entergy wouldn't have to put any money in. If the fund doesn't grow at that rate, Entergy would have to put money in at closing. So we always start the project, our decommissioning project, with a guaranteed minimum amount of funds, which ties out to our guaranteed costs to do that work.
Thank you.
I'm trying to be really mindful of the time, and we want to get a couple of questions in from the public, and I've got George, Derek, and Martin who have questions. So if make them as quick as possible.
I'll try and be brief. This is actually following up on Dr. Irwin's question, Mike and Scott. Appreciate your discussion of in terms of site restoration and cleanup in parallel with the D&D with the non-radiological. But I think the question that I have that is follow-up to Dr. Irwin's question is about, he's asking you when you're going to be doing site characterization. I think not to put words in your mouth, I think you're saying that you've done some due diligence, you've done some further site characterization. I guess the question is what you are going to petition the Public Service Board going to have details of what your anticipated site characterization is going to be? Because clearly A&R anticipates that you have to do further characterization in order to determine, under the IROC, the normal course of events is to actually do further site characterization than what we are aware of anyway, to adequately, identify what the contamination is and therefore what the appropriate cleanup is for all pathways.
George, that's a great question. I said this before, it bears repeating. We're still fine-tuning the testimony. One of the things that we hope to gain from this tonight was some insight into concerns that people had that give us a better opportunity to craft the testimony to address that. So we haven't made a final decision on how we're going to deal with site characterization in the testimony, to what level of detail, but the fact that you've raised that reinforces the issue that we need to take into consideration before we submit. Thank you.
Hi. So I'm just trying to understand some of the basics of this trust fund. I heard that the money that's in the trust fund now was all paid in by ratepayers over the course, and then it's grown. And I also heard that money that was left over, if there were any, after the cleanup would go back to ratepayers. Is that true or not? Or was that true?
Some portion goes back. It's not 100%.
Okay. In this new current relationship that you're proposing, it seems to me that the NorthStar has the incentive to do the cleanup as cheaply as possible to maximize the profit. And that's a concern to me.
So I understand that concern, but here's the basic economics. So the project itself isn't done until the ISFAC's gone. And so our basic financial model, I'll just tell you how we do this in a very transparent way. We calculated the cost to do the work, including contingency. We measured that against the trust fund, and we built the starting trust fund balance that we need based on having a minimum residual amount of money when we're done with the first phase of the decommissioning and the plant's gone. There's enough money there to perpetually fund the ISFAC. The operations of the ISFAC are not a cheap endeavor. So we're leaving enough money there. The actual splitting of the money, it's 55-45 to the state, doesn't occur until the ISFAC's gone, which could be 50 years from now. And so that's not our profit motivation there. I can tell you that. We're simply happy to get the project to the position where there's an ISFAC only and have enough money there to run that ISFAC until it can be done. And the potential windfall is so far out that the net present value is de minimis to us.
Commissioner Recchia wanted to add one quick comment.
Thank you. So I've been described, and I have described my comments on this thing as being cautiously optimistic. And one of the reasons is that I recognize, with all due respect to Entergy's business model, I think that for the next 20 years, the business of nuclear power plant is in decommissioning, not in running them, sorry. So I take solace in the fact that NorthStar wants to do a good job on this in order to move on to the other plants, both in terms of time and demonstration of capability. So I think that is working as much in our favor as our regulatory oversight will, in terms of like making sure there's enough money there, making sure they have the capacity. I think that there's an alignment of interests here that I think is helpful.
I'm really getting mindful of the time, so I'm going to ask people to.
So I just want to I guess it's more of just a request and a comment. So I know under docket 7862, the Public Service Board was expecting to get site restoration going by December 2015. And I've pleaded that there be a public conversation about site restoration standards for a couple of years now. And I appreciate that the site restoration standards are going to be introduced into a application for the Public Service Board. But man, I really hope you guys are going to come back to this panel, or you're going to come back to the town and have conversations about what do you want? What is in the best public interest? Not just what's in Entergy's interest or NorthStar, but have a conversation with Vernon, with the larger community. I understand the process that you're going through, but I hope that you're not going to just force that conversation to be held within the formal confines of the Public Service Board. Because folk have been asking for this for a while now. And so I just hope that you guys will commit to bringing the conversation back to the panel, that you'll be having with the Vernon Planning Commission, the town of Vernon, about to what standards the site should be restored.
Chris, I appreciate the comment. We are mindful of that concern. We're also mindful that as a legal matter, we were admonished to make sure we talk about the legal consequences of things. The Public Service Board is entitled and empowered to set those standards. So regardless of what we might discuss and what we might wish, we ultimately have to persuade the Public Service Board that those are the right standards. And obviously they will take into consideration the public discussions, I'm sure. I just don't want to underestimate the importance of having this resolved at the Public Service Board, because legally that's where it resides.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's where, because that's the way that the law works. But that does not preclude the parties involved in bringing that to the public, even to inform what they would take to the Public Service Board. So since you're going to the Public Service Board first, I hope you'll also be willing to have an open ear, because you could always amend your petition based on what you hear from the town of Vernon and the other people involved in this. So, yeah, Public Service Board is the ultimate decider. They decide what's in the interest of the public good. But they too will have a hearing to hear what the general public wants. But, you know, but that's in a very formal process. You are not bound by that. You can also reach out just as good process to say, hey, town of Vernon, what do you think? Other folk in the region, what do you think? What should it be restored to? To what end? What would you like to eventually see the site developed as? So that'll inform to what standard the sites need to be cleaned up. So, Mike, I get what you're saying, but I just hope that you will make use of this panel, that you'll make use of Vernon Planning Commission and other entities to have these conversations. That it does not just have to be through the whole damn formal structured Public Service Board process.
No, I agree, and that's certainly our intention to do that. I think it's good to have that conversation now, and that is what we plan to do.
Thanks.
Yes, I just wanted to add something, Chris. It may not be aware of this because I know you don't get to Vernon that often, but there has been a lot of communication between groups in Vernon, including the Planning Commission, other groups that have met with Entergy on future use of the site. Entergy's been very generous in showing us what they had. The Planning Commission's been on tours of the site. So you probably are not in the loop for that. Oh, you are? Well, I see that as a wonderful step that they have taken to include members of the Vernon community in the process, certainly. I think it's already ongoing. Thank you.
Two questions. One is, could you talk about, if I understand correctly, under the current ownership, that Entergy, rather than dipping into the trust fund for fuel storage costs, you've been using a line of credit, and then you've got to go through all the rigmarole of suing the federal government and getting your money back. Is that how this will continue under NorthStar, or the line of credit, or will you be using the trust fund as kind of a revolving loan for funding the storage costs?
I'm going to let Scott answer your question about NorthStar, but I just want to clarify. We are utilizing a line of credit for some of the spent fuel management costs, not all of the spent fuel management costs. The big chunk that's related to the work to move the spent fuel from the pool to the dry cask storage is the main chunk that's being funded by the line of credit. There are some other spent fuel management costs that even today we do recover from the trust fund. So I just wanted to clarify that point, but I'll let Scott address the question about what happens next.
Yeah, and I think an important distinction as well, the line of credit is established to construct the dry fuel storage pads, the ISFC, that whole system, to acquire the containers and to move the fuel. That all happens before we take ownership. So we are not going to access a line of credit with us or Entergy's line of credit, because that work will all be done before we take ownership of the site or of the company that owns the site. Ongoing work, the simple maintenance, or the ISFC, say post-closing, post-completion of the decommissioning efforts, the money that I said we would have enough money for an in perpetuity operation of the ISFC, that's money that sits in the NDT. And so it's used to fund ongoing operations. And you're right, you have to sue the DOE to get your money back, or more likely, when the plant's decommissioned, we'll fall into a status much like the other Yankees have, where there's a settlement or an agreement that allows us to recover those funds more quickly. But we won't be spending money that we don't anticipate coming back into the equation. It'll be essentially a cash flow thing to fund that piece of the business while we're in the process of recovery of that money from DOE.
Okay. And my other question for Mike is, I understand the profit potential. We had a couple questions for NorthStar, but I'm trying to figure out what's in this for Entergy, because I read somewhere that I think you get $1,000 payment for the whole entire site. You probably have more, transaction costs than that. You have to make up the difference up to the 5.5%. You've got to provide certain financial assurances that go on for quite a few years. So, net, you're putting money into the equation here, which if you were not doing this and you stuck with the original 60-year safe store scenario, you had a plan whereby you would be making the profits that NorthStar is going to make. So can you talk about that? I understand you're not in the decommissioning business, but can you talk about, why are you willing to now put in quite a bit of money into the equation here?
Well, the point you just made at the end of your question is the most important one. We are not in the decommissioning business. That is not what we do. We have a governance structure, we have employees, we have business units, we've got 13,000 wonderful employees, and we are primarily in the business of making electricity in the Northeast and making and selling and transmitting electricity in the South. Decommissioning nuclear power plants is not a core competency for us. That is not what is part of our long-term business objective, and we're not interested in, quite frankly, being in that business. There are people who do it better who are already in that business. And so if you think about any business, any small business, any medium-sized business, somebody might walk into your store, why don't you start selling, phones? Well, that's not in our business. That's not what we want to get involved in. There is risk to us of managing a project over 50 or 60 years. There's uncertainty on cost increases, on trust fund performance, on issues, on changes in law, changes in regulation. And if you look at that and you say, well, this is not a business I'm in, and I'm going to be in it if I stay for 50 years with all that uncertainty, you might conclude that selling the plant and the company that owns the plant to somebody who does this for a living and is, the number one decommissioning and dismantlement business in the world, and its partners, it's a pretty compelling case. It was not a difficult decision for us once we were familiar with the technical capability, the financial capability, the experience, the expertise, the track record, the business acumen of this group. The way this started is we looked around for some other alternatives. We wanted to see what was the option. What's the best option? What's the best option for Entergy? What's the best option for its employees? What's the best option for Vermont, including Windham County and the town of Vernon? And when we did that, we started to evaluate the possibility of transferring this to somebody else who could do it better. And it's not that there's anything in it for us, other than perhaps elimination of the risk and the uncertainty of staying in this business for 50 years that's not our primary business.
Well, that's good, thank you. I wasn't trying to change your mind.
No.
And I really, if you happen to hear my little speech at the last meeting where I was trying to come up with some scenario to do this in the next 10 or 15 years, I really applaud this approach. It's great. Thank you.
Great. Now what I want to do is, because we are running behind, but I want to still take some questions from the public. and we've got maybe 10 or so minutes. So what I would ask, and I'm going to say the same to you folks as I said to the panel, if you can keep your question really, really short, and probably 2 or 3 people. So if it's a question that you've already heard, please don't ask it just for the sake of it. And what I'll ask you to do is go up to the podium, state your name, and where you're from. Yes, sir. Yes, you have to go up to the podium.
Howard Fairman, private citizen. And according to U.S. Nuclear News, Entergy receives, and I quote, nominal cash consideration, promissory note equal to the amount owed at the time of closing under a credit facility to finance Vermont Yankee's dry fuel storage cost, unquote. NorthStar receives, quoting again, Nuclear Decommissioning Trust, the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust, obligations for used fuel management and decommissioning. So I have 2 questions for Mr. State. The first one is, how is the referenced promissory note to be repaid? And second, which American nuclear power plants have these 4 companies that you are, yours and the ones you're allying with, these 4 companies successfully decommissioned together?
Okay, what was the first question? Oh, the promissory note. The promissory note is the draw that Entergy is currently taking subject to recovery of funds from the Department of Energy. So the source of repayment of the promissory note is going to be recovery from the Department of Energy under their obligations that they've breached at this point for removal of spent nuclear fuel under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. The second question?
Which American nuclear power plants have you and your 3 associated companies successfully decommissioned?
So power plants, 0.
Nuclear power plants.
Nuclear power plants, 0. Power plants, many. Nuclear power plants, 0.
Let me just add, there's one thing, because I think some of the responsibility for pursuing this is on us, but it's worth noting that in the United States nuclear fleet, all of the commercial reactors in the U.S., a handful have been decommissioned. All but 1 were decommissioned by the owner of the plant. Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee, et cetera. I'll leave it to others and for another night when we have more time to determine whether that was done efficiently by any of those owners. But there's only 1 other nuclear plant in the United States, commercial nuclear plant, that's being decommissioned in a fashion as we're pursuing here, where you turn it over to a different company. And that's the Zion nuclear power plant in Illinois, which is on track, under budget, and going to be decommissioned on time. And what's really happening here in the U.S., as this generation of nuclear plants is being decommissioned, the industry is finding a more efficient and effective way to decommission. And I expect Zion to be completed successfully, Vermont Yankee will be completed successfully, and other nuclear power plants in the U.S. that are decommissioned, I expect most of them to be decommissioned this way.
And what's on the middle question? Zion is being decommissioned.
Sir, I'm sorry. We have to move on to the next person questioning. Okay.
The company is called Entergy Solutions that is decommissioning Zion. They are another provider, but as with many things, there are more than 1 providers of this service.
Leslie, did you have a question?
So my name's Leslie Sullivan Sachs. I'm from Brattleboro. So there's a lot of firsts here. Vermont's never afraid to be first. But I'm wondering about the regulatory hurdles that have to be overcome, or hoops that have to be jumped through. And tonight I learned about a lot of them. There's the new Holtec casks for fresh fuel that haven't been approved by the NRC. WCS is still seeking approval to get high-level waste at their facility. This will be the first time that the NRC will ever look at a sale of this type ever. And then here in Vermont, we have a change in administration. We'll have a new governor, we'll have a new attorney general. God knows what'll happen at the Public Service Board. And it's the first time that this financing model has ever been used before. So I'm just wondering if you folks have talked about if the regulatory process slows down your timeline, how that affects NorthStar's deal. I mean, I'm assuming that you'll have a deal, the deal will be done, and then half of this stuff will still happen after the fact.
Well, actually, I'll speak to it from Entergy's perspective. These regulatory approvals are needed before. All of them. And if they're not obtained,
Including the WCS one?
I don't think we need a WCS.
The WCS item doesn't have anything to do with decommissioning. They're petitioning to take spent nuclear fuel. That's not part of this project.
That's not part, okay.
No.
So just perhaps we stepped over this initial issue, but if for some reason any one of these regulatory approvals were not obtained, we simply wouldn't do the transaction. We would not close, and we would be back where we are, and it would be under a safe store model on the timeline that's been previously discussed.
And you're thinking 2 years?
I'm sorry, 2 years to
2
get
years?
Regulatory approvals?
Yeah.
Yes, that's standard both in Vermont and matters that have been pending in front of the Public Service Board. And I think I was clear about this when I discussed it. We have no guarantee they will act within 2 years. Certainly the accepted practice has been within that time frame. If we get to the end of that period of time and the board has not acted or the NRC has not acted, the parties may have to reevaluate the transaction, but we'll take that sort of one step at a time and not speculate at this point.
And are you promoting this as a new model under the new decommissioning rules that are being discussed? Has NorthStar been before the NRC to say, hey, here's a new way of doing it? We'll be the guinea pigs.
We've had 2 meetings with the NRC on this topic. One was a series of drop-in meetings, very informal, with a number of staff, and we had a closed-door meeting with the NRC about a month ago, I believe. And we previewed, in a similar manner to what we showed you this evening, what we would like to do in Vermont, and I would say got generally favorable consideration from the staff to proceed. With a belief that while there's new elements to this, it's not a new way to decommission the plant, it's a new way to structure the process of decommissioning the plant.
Thank you.
We have time for one more person.
Ed Anthes, Dummerston. Mr. State, as I listened to your presentation, I was confused about what might be left behind, and perhaps you could help me with what seems like it's a contradiction, but I assume it's to be determined. I understood you to say that the entire facility would be crushed, scrubbalized, and moved to Texas. But shortly after you said that you'd be happy to leave some behind, and maybe that one of the questions is how many feet below grade do you go? If Vermont or the Public Service Board wants you to take it all, and so then be able to examine all of the soil that surrounds any structure there, is that costed into your proposal?
So as you might imagine, the calculational model that you use to determine cost is based on a number of assumptions. So we've made assumptions as to how far below grade we would remove foundations. And I'm not implying that we leave contaminated concrete below that level, but the lower level foundations of the building are surveyed, cleared, and released for unrestricted use. And we simply take the foundations from grade down a certain number of feet so that when you regrade the site, there's a layer of soil or material that can grow crops or something like that left. The process is generally done on almost every facility we do anywhere, where you free release the structure that's way below grade, and you rubbleize clean concrete that's not contaminated, it's not activated, it's easy to survey and measure, and you fill that void space with that material. It avoids shipping millions of tons of material that's essentially clean and putting it into a landfill, is effectively clean concrete. What we've done from our costing model is assumed we would remove structures to a certain level below grade, and we would ship all of that material to Texas from a costing perspective.
And what level is that?
That's a level that, it's an analytical level that we've established at this point, and it'll be in my testimony later in the month. That's part of the process of establishing these standards, is coming to an agreement on that. What we've done is we've assumed a certain level, and we know if we go above or below that level, the cost impact of more or less generation of rubbleized concrete that we would have to deal with, and that impact on the overall cost of the project.
Thank you.
What we're going to do is we're going to take about a 10-minute break. But before we do, I want to thank both Scott and Mike for coming here this evening. I'll put you on the spot and say, as I've said before, this is only the first of many meetings, so hopefully we'll see you or representatives from your companies here. And if people didn't get their questions answered, we will again have subsequent meetings. I would urge people not to run out of the building, but to come back and take part in the rest of the meeting, because there is interesting things to come. We meet, the panel meets, sometimes monthly, sometimes every other month. And if you put your email address on that piece of paper out there, we will keep you updated on when we meet. And we've been meeting for 2 years, so I know some of you are coming for your first time, but we encourage you, one, to stay this evening and to come back. So at 8 o'clock, we will resume the meeting. Thanks. We want to get going so we are not here until midnight. What we're going to do is there are a couple of items on the agenda that we're going to spend less time on, so we're hopefully going to be on time. And first we've got Joe Lynch, who is going to give us the Entergy update on decommission activities.
All right, thank you, Kate. Marty, if you don't mind, I don't have the clicker there, so if you either want to drive or thank you very much. Here you go, sir. All right, just want to go over some of the activities that have been going on at the site since our last meeting in October. We continue to work on efforts to close out systems that are no longer needed at the site in an effort to remove power and energy from those buildings as we head into the winter season to overall reduce costs at the site. So that's on schedule and going forward. And as always, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission continues to do their routine inspections in accordance with their inspection activities. We're in the fourth quarter of 2016. They've been to the site and will continue to do so, and they'll document any of their findings in the February timeframe. Generally takes about 45 days after the end of the quarter. As mentioned in the presentations, and as you've heard from me over the last several meetings, our big focus is on dry fuel storage and the project to construct the second of 2 dry cast fuel storage pads. We started that work back in July. All the work thus far is on schedule or ahead of schedule. We talked about at the last meeting, we were in the final stages of putting into service a brand new 200 kW a security diesel generator. That work is now complete. Once that was done, we were able to remove the former diesel generator known as the John Deere diesel. That diesel has been removed, as well as the building that housed it. So that's another milestone that got us ready for what was then to be the demolition of what is known as the North Warehouse. I showed that in previous slides. The North Warehouse is the location where the second pad will be installed. The North Warehouse was successfully demoed by, actually, NorthStar was the contractor that we used to do that work. It was done ahead of schedule. All of the work demoing the building is complete, including the pad, and it's now being shipped off as waste, and we expect to have all of that done by mid-December. In preparation for the loading campaign that will begin again in 2017, we've now received all 12 of the dry fuel storage systems that will be used. That includes the multi-purpose canisters and the what are known as the high storms or the concrete overpacks. Those have been fabricated and are stored on the pad for winter storage until we pick up the activities in the spring of 2017. Hard to see from these photos, but you'll see in the upper left-hand corner a photo of an excavator taking down the north warehouse, and then the photo in the lower right now shows the site graded and excavated, ready for the next steps as we get ready to build the second pad. We'll start some efforts until the winter comes upon us, then we'll take a break from that project and start again in the spring once we have the opportunity to work on the site safely after the winter weather has passed. As far as water management, a couple updates in that regard. We continue to lower the rate of intrusion water into the site, which has obviously been our goal. At this point, we only need one storage tank or frac tank on site to capture the water that is coming into the turbine building lower elevations. We've just winterized that tank so we can accept water and ship water during the winter months. The efforts that we've taken to reduce the ingress of water has been successful. We sealed what was known as the seismic gap. This is the gap between the reactor and the turbine building. That effort has reduced the amount of intrusion rates about 50%. We're still monitoring that. But prior to that effort, we were looking at about 900 to 1,000 gallons per day of intrusion water, and with the latest numbers, we're about 400 to 500 gallons a day, so about a 50% decrease. So that's a success, and we continue to look at other areas that we can seal up or repair to continue to minimize that intrusion water. As mentioned in earlier presentations, we've been shipping all of that water to a facility in Tennessee owned by Entergy Solutions. We were shipping about one shipment per week, about 5,000 gallons per week, but with this lower intrusion rate, we're about 3 shipments per month. And thus far, we've shipped just under 400,000 gallons of water to the disposal facility. Update on the Decommissioning Trust Fund. We reported at the end of September that the trust fund was just about $575 million. The current balance at the end of October 31st, and we'll have some new numbers probably in the next week or so, now being December, but at the end of October, $563 million. The decrease was primarily due to the market. There was some negative market performance in addition to some small reimbursements from the trust. So a summary of where we are to date thus far this year, we've taken $60.4 million in qualified withdrawals. We've seen about $31.2 million in market gains, and we've paid about $3.3 million in fund expenses. So that's since January 1st of this year. And I'll continue to give those updates. Probably next time we meet, we'll have a summary for 2016. The other trust fund that we pay attention to and monitor is the Site Restoration Trust that currently stands at $16.7 million as of October 31st. That's a slight decrease from September, again, due to negative market impacts. We funded that at the thus far $15 million. To date, the fund has grown about $1.7 million, and we'll be making our next payment to the Site Restoration Trust at the end of this month, bring it up to $20 million, and then the last payment will be made at the end of 2017. And then finally, we continue with our communication and outreach. The focus now, obviously, is transitioning to get more information out about the transaction. Tonight, of course, was the first of many meetings that we'll be talking about the transaction. We're also doing some local outreach as well as other groups. On occasion, we'll have stakeholder tours at the site. And as always, any information, including the presentation that you saw by Scott State and Mike Toomey, will be up on the voidecommissioning.com website for access after this meeting.
Thank you, Joe. Does anyone on the panel have any questions for Joe? Chris?
Just a quick one, Joe. You may not know the answer to this, but I was just curious. I mean, I know Mr. Twombley was saying that Entergy doesn't have experience with decommissioning, and maybe I don't understand what TLG Services does, but I thought TLG did decommissioning too, or do they just do cost estimation?
They just do cost estimating. TLG Services is kind of the leading company in the country that will do the cost estimates.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Not any physical work.
Okay.
Derek?
Joe, I briefly, it was mentioned in your presentation, multi-purpose canisters. What are they and where do they store?
Well, the Holtec system includes the actual stainless steel canister that houses the 68 fuel assemblies. I believe it's called multi-purpose because not only can it be stored in the overpack, but it's also what is known as intermodal. So that same canister, seal welded, can then be moved to another location. So it can be put on a rail car, on a truck, on a barge, and brought to another site. So these are designed so that you don't have to offload them. They can then be shipped in a transport cask to Yucca Mountain, to an interim storage facility. So that provides the multi-purpose to them.
Do they store spent fuel?
This is actually where the spent fuel is stored in. These canisters, they're stainless steel canisters with a rack system that holds 68 fuel assemblies. It's loaded underwater. It's then vacuum dried, inert gas, seal welded shut. They're put inside of the concrete overpacks that are stored on our pad. But sometime in the future, when we have the ability to ship these off-site, we'll just take them out of the overpack, put them into a transportation cask, and they would be shipped to their ultimate disposal site.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else have a question for Joe? All right. Thank you, Joe. What we're going to do is have George, oh, there he went, I couldn't find him, sort of give us the broad overview of what goes in, I guess, to site restoration standards. As we heard from the presentation today, the Entergy and NorthStar will be filing at the end of the year. So I think we can have, maybe people disagree, just keep it a very short discussion because we really have nothing to discuss beyond George sort of giving us a broad overview of what the process is. But you can decide after we hear what George says.
Okay, I'm George Desch, and full disclosure, I actually lied to you in the introduction. I said I was Deputy Commissioner of the department. I'm not anymore. But I am here representing A&R, and this is going to be the best presentation of the night, so I'm glad you stayed. In spite of the fact that I can't see those slides, and I don't think you can any, but
George, it's a pretty color though.
It's like, you know, I was going with black and white, and I thought it was boring. So this is going to be very brief. What I want to do is talk about the non-radiologic. Go to the. Am I controlling this, Marty? All right. So I did. Thank you, Marty. So that says non-radiological site restoration standards, which for all intents and purposes, everybody that's involved in this process has agreed that Vermont has jurisdiction over the non-radiological site restoration standards. The Public Service Board and the parties have, in the processes that have, since Entergy acquired this, have been a couple of dockets involving site restoration standards, but the parties, which are basically NV, the Public Service Department, A&R, and the Department of Health, have basically established site restoration standards. And the 2013 order, which was the most recent order, actually it was in 2014, but it incorporated a settlement agreement and memorandum of understanding that actually contemplated a process for establishing complete site restoration standards. And Scott and Mike sort of alluded to that process up and coming. We're anticipating here with the next process going forward. And of course, that process, as they anticipated it would be, would involve them submitting a petition to the Public Service Board. And you heard them say tonight that they were going to essentially propose site restoration standards. But in the case of the site restoration standards that are already in place, they involve timing, which was that the site restoration was to begin immediately after radiological D&D, which is, as you've heard, decontamination and dismantlement. And of course, under SafeStore, that was not anticipated for a long period of time. So that's something that they are obviously considering changing in terms of timing. But probably most importantly, the 2014 Certificate of Public Good essentially set restoration standards, which would be that the site needed to be restored to unrestricted use. And that unrestricted use is tied to the IROC, or IROCPP, which doesn't sound like IROC at all when it's spelled out, but that's what we call it internally in the department. And it's the investigation and remediation of contaminated properties, and it's essentially the process we use for evaluating any kind of hazardous waste site that comes to our attention through numerous venues, but it can be an old industrial site, it could be a brownfield site, et cetera, but we use the investigation and remediation of contaminated properties procedure to assess, and it lays out, prescribes basically investigation, site characterization, investigation, development of corrective action plans. All that's anticipated to be done here. It also, the settlement agreement essentially anticipated that there be removal of all structures and no rubblization. Again, those have been discussed here tonight. What they contemplated that was that in the settlement agreement that a year later, December 31st in 2014, that the complete assessment of all the non-radiological conditions would occur, and that there would be, subsequent to that, there would be a public process involved to essentially establish complete site restoration standards. That has not occurred yet. But under that process, has been alluded to in the previous presentation, essentially it contemplates again that you know, as that process, a public process unfolded, that there would be an evaluation of potentially different standards and the timing of the site restoration if the properties were to be used for other use, commercial or industrial uses were cited in particular. So the current status that we have now is that we have not engaged in any, or determined any future site restoration standards or specific site restoration standards. There has not been a complete site assessment that we are aware of to date, but we did actually submit comments with respect to what we had, what Entergy submitted as a site assessment, which lays out specific details. And again, I was suggesting to Mike earlier tonight that we would anticipate that they would be addressing those. So that's really all I have.
That was quick. Does anybody have any questions for George? Chris Campney looks like he's thinking. He's gonna wait. Yeah.
So, for folk who don't know, and Chris, I don't know if you want to answer this or not to put you on the spot, Aaron, but you might want to. So they've said that they're going to file testimony, or I guess drop a 45-day pre-file notice before Christmas. So somebody may just want to say, so regional planning commissions, that has to go to us, it has to go to the towns, but I'm just trying to figure out how you guys envision this whole process working as far as getting public comment beyond just the public service board.
I'm going to address that when I come up there if you want to wait, but I think in terms of Aaron's contribution here, Aaron Kosicki's our attorney for the Public Service Department, working on nuclear, all things nuclear. I think their filing is going to be a substantive filing on the 15th, mid-month, because this is this in the public interest, this transaction? It is not, I don't think it requires the 45-day notice. I'm seeing Aaron nod his head. So I think by mid-month, if they are on schedule based on what Mike said, and certainly by the end of the year, we would expect to see a comprehensive filing that addressed a bunch of things about this transaction. So it won't just be the notice that comes in. But you guys, as parties to the previous proceedings, I would hope that they would copy you, but if they don't, we will.
But I think so not to get, this is kind of important, so not trying to get too deep into the weeds. But I think what statute allows for us is to respond to the 45-day pre-file notification, and that the Public Service Board is required to take that, to give due consideration of those comments based on that 45-day pre-file. And then when they file the final application, they're supposed to give due consideration to our comments. If there's a substantial change to the final application submitted. So Jim, maybe you remember, but I think it's silent on what happens in this case. Because the Public Service Board, and it makes a big, if folk who are watching at home, it makes a difference because otherwise we have to play in the full game, and they don't have to give due consideration to anything else that we comment on.
So now I'm seeing, let Jim go on, but now I'm seeing what you're talking about. You're referring to the kind of the new statute that allows and requires. This is old? Okay, so you're not doing that.
This is not substantial deference, no.
Okay, so what I need to do is,
Oh, do you want to go to the microphone?
yeah, let me go on here.
Just to throw this in with, I know there's probably an exception here that I'm unaware of, but when Entergy filed for the power uprate, they filed a filing, and in the back was they dropped the full application on the board. I called the board and objected because we hadn't gotten a 45-day notice. The answer I got was, yes, you did, it's in the filing. And in the filing was less than a page letter, basically saying, we're gonna increase this thing. Have a nice day. And so I went to the hearing and said, you can't do that, because the statute requires you provide enough information in the 45-day notice to allow parties to submit a substantive response. And the board ruled, based on a gas pipeline case from a few years earlier, that that was correct. And I was given the opportunity to object to the whole proceeding going forward, and decided that I didn't want to be burned in effigy by anyone, so I didn't do that. But it's an important precedent, and I think it places the towns in the region in the position of being caught totally off. This wasn't thought up last week, and I don't think it's at all fair to cut out the parties who are given a statutory right to comment before the filing and say this is in some kind of special public interest. I don't know where that exception lies, so maybe you do.
And not only give comment, but comment to which the Public Service Board is to give due consideration.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Sure, so let me just caveat this all by saying that I can only speak with fairly limited knowledge because I don't have the statute book in front of me. Is this on?
It is on.
What you were speaking to, Chris, is focused specifically to Section 248 petitions, which deals with the construction of new facilities.
Not destruction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the point. I don't know what the statutory basis under which Entergy will file this petition. My understanding is it will probably not be a Section 248 petition, but rather it will probably be a petition filed under Section 109, which would be the transfer of property. And that is the focus of 109 petitions is whether or not it's in the public interest. That is a separate analysis from the 248 criteria that this group is typically used to dealing with the construction of, say, renewable generation facilities or whatnot. So because I haven't seen Entergy's filing yet, I don't know whether or not a 45-day notice requirement is going to be triggered. It depends on the statutory basis under which they file it. If it's a 109 petition, my guess is that that 45-day notice provision is not going to be required. But I don't know that because I obviously haven't seen the filing. So,
If I could really quickly, if that's the case, I have no trouble saying that I feel totally misled by Entergy tonight, because I know that they know that we all think of 248 when we're talking about this. And, anyone who's raised children has had to teach the concept of lying by telling the truth in a funny way. And that's, I would be really objecting. If they did it and it's allowed in the statute, then fine, it's allowed in the statute. But there's an ethical responsibility to be clear with the public, and that didn't happen tonight if this is what goes forward.
right, and I just want to be very clear that I do not know the basis under which they're going to file. So I'm speculating, so I would say take what I say with a very huge grain of salt.
So do you know in a 109, do town plans and regional plans have any standing at all, or are we just another party and we'll see what happens?
Off the top of my head, I don't think there's any specific language under section 109 that refers to town plans, but again, that's just me.
But site restoration standards would be 248.
Well, the site, so this is really interesting, and we're gonna have to look into it. No, neither am I, but that doesn't stop me from weighing in on legal things like this. I think in one of his slides showed this. There was also a transfer of the CPG, right, which is might be under 109. It might be considered a transfer of license or permit, or transfer of property, or it might be triggering the CPG conditions that were in the old docket about the site restoration standards and how that gets done. So I think we got some more work to do to figure out the process. Regardless, and this was going to be part of what I was going to say up there, is that whatever we get by mid to late month here, we will then evaluate that in the context of what they are asking for under what statutes, and we'll figure out whether an additional 45-day notice is required for, everything gets put on hold, or there might be two pieces to this. We just don't know right now.
And again, this may not seem like a big deal, but for towns especially, whether you love the transfer or not, no matter how you feel about it, that comment on that 45-day pre-file notification is the easiest way to participate and have the Public Service Board actually, and for your comments to actually have standing before the Public Service Board, right, Aaron? Section 248. Right. So that's why this issue is important, because otherwise there may not be that opportunity for those comments on what they're proposing to have that kind of weight that statute requires PSB to consider. So this is not just procedural minutia. This actually has some bearing on the parties to whose plans would be given due consideration. It's the easiest way to participate. So just FYI, that's why I raised the issue.
Does anyone else have any? Now that we're confused, do we have any? Okay. You can stay at your seat, or you want to go to the big podium?
I'm going to go up to the big podium, because these guys are going to bug me the whole time.
Oh, okay. Now, what have I asked Commissioner Recchia to do, and I don't want to presume that this is his last ever meeting, because I don't want anyone writing headlines, this is his last ever meeting, but I've asked him sort of like to download with us the things that we should be thinking about as we move forward. So it's sort of a free-flowing, whatever you want to say.
Thank you. Is this working for you guys?
Yes.
Here. Okay, great. Thanks. I'm not going to be using 20 minutes for those of you who are worried about this, because Kate said I needed to download everything I have in my brain, and that's only going to take about 4.
Just send the take 2 minutes.
So, first of all, I want to lay out some process stuff that the department is going to go through here. Obviously, when Martin raised this issue at the last meeting about, gee, can't there be a way to do this sooner? I was kind of sitting there going, well, you heard me say, I think that maybe there is something that might happen that could make this sooner. And I wasn't just being clairvoyant, but I think that, we have been in discussions with Entergy, partially over the site restoration standards, and partially understanding what has gone on here that was presented to you today. We've reached no agreement or any type of commitment to them at all on this. We've described it as intriguing and cautiously optimistic that this might enable the site to be completely restored in our lifetimes, and that has always been important to me. And as I get older, it's becoming even more important to get it quicker. The process is going to be that they file whatever they file with the Public Service Board, and as we just discussed, we're going to have to do some work to figure out where it goes and what the parameters are. But regardless of that, I would expect my department to reach out to you all and to the town and to the regional commission, and we've already had some conversations with the town and the regional commission, or Chris, I shouldn't say the commission because we haven't done that yet. But we will do this and listen to what you have and what you are thinking. The thing I would put in your head, because it was mentioned, the removal of all structures and the quote-unquote rubblization piece are things that, as we think about what's in the public interest, we're going to think seriously about the benefits versus costs of those in the context of making the site reusable for any purpose. That's going to be a focus of this, because it's clear that removal of all structures costs more than removal of no structures, and somewhere in between is the right balance. If you remove all structures and it requires another 15 years to get the decommissioning trust fund up to that cost, is that worth it? Those are types of things we'll be assessing, and I want to be honest with you that we are willing to consider the pros and cons of that, and I would ask you all to be thinking about that too. Similarly, the rubblization piece, which is really breaking things up and putting them in voids that are there. One of the things we certainly would require is that any foundations or any holes below ground be filled. Again, if this fill is clean and meets residential standards, or I won't put the words in A&R's mouth, but the IROC standards for use for any purpose, is it better to crumble that up and take it off site and then bring back in clean fill that meets the same standard, or does it make sense to use some of that material on site and avoid those costs? Those are things we have not decided in any way, but that we will be evaluating as something before the Public Service Board, and that I would welcome discussion with the town and with the panel about the pros and cons of doing that and seeing where you feel the right balance is. If Entergy does not file by mid-month here, and I'm pretty sure that they are going to, we will request of the board that they open a docket on site restoration standards, because as has been discussed here, that has been going on for a while, and I think we're ready to have that public discussion before the board. And then if Entergy files after that at some point, those dockets can be consolidated. But I do expect Entergy will file as they described today, and that we'll just have that proceeding that covers both site restoration standards and this transaction. I do want to take a moment and just say, this is what I'll say is closing. I think this probably is my last meeting. I know it's my last meeting in this position, so I will promise you that. And I am amazed at what we have actually accomplished the last 4 years that I've been doing this. And I want to thank, in particular, Aaron Kosicki, who disappeared. Oh, there you are. And also sitting, well, he was sitting next to him, but now he's not. I don't know why. Kyle Landis-Marinello with the AG's office has been really a partner in our work at the department for evaluating NRC issues, intervening in those, taking the court cases that we needed done, giving great counsel on how best to approach the discussions with Entergy. He was key in the settlement discussions of 2013, and as I reflect on that agreement, I think we accomplished a lot in terms of getting this moving in the right direction. What you heard tonight may present another opportunity, but there are a lot of devils in the details, and I promise you we will be looking at those in terms of the financial ability of NorthStar, the technical ability of NorthStar, and the guarantees that are in place to get this work done. There was some talk about what worst case scenarios might be. In my mind, the worst case scenario is this gets transferred from Entergy to NorthStar. They start the work and midway decide, you know what, we don't think this is really worth it, and leave. That, to me, is the worst case scenario, and whoever is in my position needs to make sure that that doesn't happen, and I will certainly make sure that, and I know the department is paying attention to that. And just in closing, I just want to, thank you all on the panel, and thank you all in the audience and the concerned citizens who've been coming here for many years before I was involved in this. But I do think that you're a smart group. You have both sides of this, and you have engaged in this in a very constructive way that I think will serve the town, the region, and the state really, really well. I thank you for that. So that's it.
I did invite Chris to come back as an expert anytime he wants.
Great. My memory is, I will forget stuff very quickly. So.
Yeah. Can I just ask you one question? Should we be concerned for any reason, because there is a new administration coming in, that they may not look at this the same way that you are or the members of the current administration are? And is there something we need to do as the public to raise this concern to the people on the state level?
Truthfully, of course, I don't know is the right answer, but I never just stop when I should. So I'll say, I really doubt it. They have been briefed to some extent. They will be briefed more. They'll be fully engaged, and whoever my successor is, I will download all my concerns as well as what I see the opportunity to be. And in spite of changes in administration, changes in parties that might occur, and certainly the differences on the national level, I've worked professionally in this field for a long time in Vermont, and I've never seen really dramatic changes in intelligent governance in this state. And I would expect that to continue, and I have no doubt it will. So that's what makes Vermont beautiful. I don't. And I think once up to speed on these issues, they will come to the same conclusions that we have and have the same questions and concerns and see the same opportunities, and we'll just go forward.
Can I ask you one more thing?
Okay, after that? After that question?
Well, we just had this big discussion on whether it's a 109 or 248. And I don't know, maybe I can have a conversation with either Aaron or you. I think it'd be great if the panel, we didn't wait till our January meeting to sort of understand where this is.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you is, would you or someone be willing to either have a conversation with me or write something up that I could share, with the panel, so that we're not waiting?
Sure. And if you wanted to do a special meeting between Christmas and New Year's, I'd still be able to come. So then I would have lied about this being my last meeting.
We can, right, we could do that just for that.
No,
but-
I think we can do that. You know, we'll have to take some time to wade through it. I'm sure that, you know, Susan and everybody else will be calling us that day to say, what does it say? And I'll say, I don't know yet. But I think, you know, we certainly can create that type of summary. We need to anyway for a variety of purposes. So.
Chris, I just want to say, as truly a citizen appointee who is sometimes baffled by what I hear until I go and study it further or have it interpreted for me, I've always appreciated what I've seen and heard as a refreshing point of view from you, mixed in with all the legalese and all the officialese and all the expertise. But I've always appreciated the candor and the willingness to step out of the sandbox a little bit. And I think that's helped make our job a lot easier too. So I just want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, you're welcome. Do you have a cake for me, right?
I know, I was going to bake something.
We have the answer. I don't know if the public comments.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Chris? And I too, I want to echo, oh, yes. You have to come up here so we can hear.
I understand.
So this is Peter Vanderdoes from Brattleboro. This is a question for the department. In 2014, Entergy signed on to the post-decommissioning activities report, a document which was specifically spelled out what Entergy would do during the decommissioning. And it was signed by William Sarl and the Vermont Department of Health, and I think ANR and various other organizations. And so how do we get NorthStar to sign on to the same document,
Right.
or the same type of document?
Yeah, good question. So,
and hopefully keep up the standards or above that.
right. So NorthStar will assume all at least the way it's proposed, as I understand it, we'll make sure this is true. NorthStar will assume all responsibilities and obligations of Entergy that signed that agreement. So the agreement stays in force, and NorthStar takes over responsibilities associated with it. Now, you mentioned I thought you mentioned the PSDAR.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and then there was
Yep.
there was something after that. I forget what it's called.
I think you're talking about the settlement agreement, just for clarity, and there was a PSDAR commitment to file that, and Entergy did do that. There's also what George was referring to and discussing, which was the site assessment piece that we feel like hasn't been done the way it's supposed to. Somebody's got to take responsibility for that. Entergy within the next 2 years, and if this transaction went forward, NorthStar after that, if it wasn't done. But in terms of the PSDR, of course, when that was filed and agreed to be filed at the end of 2015, I think, 15. This was not, another Christmas present, exactly. This was not contemplated, right? What we heard tonight was not even on the radar screen. So what we do know is that as part of the NRC process, NorthStar or Entergy would have to file a new PSDAR, that's a post-shutdown decommissioning assessment report. So instead of the 2075 timeline, they will do it for a 2030 timeline and show how they can financially do that work in that period of time. So everything that was in the PSDAR that was originally filed by Entergy will have to be redone for this new time frame that will help us all, I think, understand what they expect to spend and where.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
Any other questions for Chris? And I just want to follow up, Chris, on what Jim said. It's been very helpful to have you on the panel. And I've appreciated it, and George has already announced that he's gone, so I want to say thanks to George as well.
I should check and see if I am still commissioner, because he was deputy commissioner when he got here, and he's not anymore, so I gotta find out what happened.
Did you check your mail?
No, I didn't check. I didn't check my mail while I was here.
Yeah. But you're welcome back anytime you'd like, and you know where we are. So, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You've all been a pleasure, really.
Now we're going to move on and talk about 2017, so I know everybody's all excited. Oh yeah, let's do one thing that I skipped over, approval of the minutes. And I don't know if everybody saw, we had an issue last month, or in October actually, with the March minutes, and I sent it out to everybody, and I don't know if it made sense. Did it make sense? Just to put the clarification into the October minutes. Jack is saying yes.
Yeah, I do want to amend what was in your proposal that you sent out for the minutes. And I was dealing from memory when we talked about the levels in the groundwater wells, and we take the data quarterly. So we just got the most recent quarterly data for November. And I think you proposed in the note that we say that all the well samples are below minimum detectable except for a small number, which happens to be 6, that is slightly above minimum detectable. And when I look at the most recent values, instead of saying that all are less than 5,000 picocuries per liter, we should say less than 5,500, because we've got one value that's at about 5,400 picocuries per liter, and that's the highest. Okay?
Yeah, and does everybody understand what we're doing? We're not changing the March minutes, we're just adding that clarification to the December 1st meeting minutes. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. No, I won't change the minutes. Does that make sense to you, Bill? That was one of your concerns? The way we're going to do it? Yes, do we have a motion? We have the March and October minutes. David Andrews has made a motion to approve the March and October minutes.
Second.
Jim Tonkovich has seconded. All in favor? Okay, the minutes are adopted. And Bill, I didn't want to leave you out as a state person, but I'm assuming you're with us. But if you're not, it's...
Here.
Oh, good, okay. I was making all kinds of assumptions, so. Now we just want to go over 2017. And when we originally made our plan, the Issues Committee had a meeting. And when we originally made our plan for 2017, it was prior to knowing about the sale. So pretty much 2017 is now up in the air. And David Andrews may have something to add to this, what we're going to do is get the Issues Committee back together this month in December to really go through what we heard tonight and figure out what the issues are now, because the issues that we have now are not necessarily issues we had when we met a month ago. What everybody on the panel has in front of them is the 4th Thursdays in every month, because that's when we have been traditionally meeting. I am not sitting here right now proposing that we meet the 1st or the 4th Thursday of every month, but given the fact that we have to figure out what the CPG schedule is, what the NRC schedule is, I don't know if we want to do what we did last year and just put these in our calendar, and then when we get back together in January, when we have more of an understanding, we can go and figure out how we want to proceed, whether it's every other month or we do 2 months and take another month off. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, because we really don't at this point know what the calendar's going to be, and we really won't know until
I'd rather protect them. It's a lot easier to take them off than put them on.
Yeah. And as everybody is, January 26, 2017 is the 4th Thursday in January. So do we want to make that the meeting the next time we meet, or does anybody have any, is everybody okay with that? So we'll
One caveat on that, I mean, we can't know until this filing is tossed over the transom what's going on. So, I mean, I'm fully in favor with that, and I'm not looking for extra meetings in my life either, but we should keep in mind the possibility that there'll be something in there that requires, or at least suggests that we do something before that.
In December?
Or in January. I mean, I don't think we'll see it till close to Christmas probably, but early in January. But, you know, if not,
Yeah.
I mean, the Public Service Board things tend to slow down after the initial frenzy.
Yeah.
But because of the uncertainty on even what statute it's being filed under, there could be comment periods that we don't even know about yet.
Yeah, why don't we do this? What we can do is set tentatively, or the next meeting for January 26, 2017. When Entergy files, obviously I can have conversations with Chris or Aaron or whomever, and then we can go, I'll send some emails around and we can all make a decision. Do we think we need to meet sooner based on the schedule? Chris?
And I'm hoping and kind of assuming that they are talking about filing a, Section 248 application. So one of the things, I would have to take this to the Wind Regional Commission and ask if they would entertain it and all, but I think the schedule would probably work, given what we heard tonight and given the January 26th date, that we could potentially incorporate handicap comments into any comments when a regional commission would have as a party in those 45-day pre-file notification comments, which the Public Service Board is required to give due consideration to. The reason I bring that up is if you remember when we were talking about the ISPAC Certificate of Public Good, remember there was the whole discussion about how do we get that before the board, because handicap wasn't a party. There was discussion about maybe Public Service Department could somehow enter it. This would be a simple way to get handicap's comments, good, bad, negative, whatever. It could just be when a regional commission collected this information, because we actually have the ability to hold hearings on these things too. And so that would be a way for handicap, for at least first blush, what they're seeing from NorthStar and Entergy, to give those comments. Same thing for Town of Vernon. And they could even respond to or incorporate those comments into anything that they do too. So I think that schedule, that's just to say, I think that schedule would work, but that may be an important bite at the apple.
Yeah, and we do have an advisory opinion process, which we knew took forever last time, but we could think that through.
And that might have to be accelerated if that's the way you want it to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. All right, so for right now, we're going to say our next meeting is January 26, 2017. And obviously, if we have to meet sooner, we will all coordinate that. And for the public out there, it's the fourth Thursdays of every month. I will also make sure that Tony can put this up, get this up on the Public Service Board website or Public Service Department website, so everybody will see what those dates are. And then we'll keep you posted.
Okay, can I just note, just not to correct that, but it's the fourth Thursday of every month except for November and December.
Yes.
Which are really the third, because the November avoids Thanksgiving and December avoids the Christmas, New Year timeframe. And just as a note, I would say all these dates look fine to me. They're all free on my calendar.
Now I'm going to ask David, did I get everything right? Do you have anything to add to what I just said?
You just need to coordinate issues.
Oh, yeah. And just a quick update as well, and I think Jim Tonkovich volunteered to help me with the annual report. Yes, but I haven't started. So I'm going to work on that, and then hopefully we'll get a draft around so that the January meeting we can approve that. One of the other things that I think we need to take a look at is our charter and the enabling legislation that formed us. We have the ability to ask the legislature to make changes if we want to. So I don't know if there's anyone who is interested in just looking at that and thinking, is there something we want to bring to the legislature to have them changed? So if anybody wants to think about that, and let me know if you want to be involved in that process. We want to get that underway too if we need something changed by the legislature. Does anybody else have anything on the panel?
Anybody on the phone?
Anybody on the phone still? No, I guess.
There's folks there. I know Lucy's having some trouble unmuting herself.
Yeah, I'm still on the phone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, wow, okay, cool. I don't know if this matters, but I wasn't, I'm a fairly new member. I've only participated in a few of these meetings, and I wasn't around for the March minutes. And could the record please just reflect that I abstained from voting on the March meeting minutes?
Yes, we can. That's no problem. And Lucy, thanks for being on the panel too. I'm not going to make assumptions on who's going or not, but thank you.
Oh, yeah, well, like Chris, my calendar is wide open for all those dates.
You and Chris can carpool.
But I just want to say that I have learned a lot in these few meetings. I've been very quiet, but I'm listening and absorbing and learning a lot about this whole process. And I just want to echo Chris's earlier comments about, just really thoughtful, smart people really deliberating some very, very important issues. So just thank you all for letting me, I feel like I've kind of been a fly on the wall just because I haven't been able to get down there. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Does anybody in the public have any comments before we end the meeting this evening? Leslie?
I think January 24th is the NRC.
That's what he announced, that.
I don't know if you just wanted to take that into your considerations about any special meetings that might occur between now and then.
Yes, yes, and we're gonna confirm that that's the date. And then that's a very good point. So does anybody else have anything? We're actually 3 minutes early. I don't know how that happened. David Andrews has made a motion to adjourn. Oh, wait. Oh, a second. Hey, before everybody goes, Happy New Year, because if we don't get together before then, Happy New Year. And we'll keep you posted if there's anything to know. Keep up on the Public Service Department website. So thank you, everybody.